Hey guys, we're continuing our study on obedience and faith and how basically faith in God is the underlying motivation behind obedience, and therefore lack of faith is the chief motivation behind disobedience, that we don't trust that the things that God tells us not to do, He tells us is for our own good. We know best, so therefore we disobey and we do these things. And ultimately it comes down to an issue of faith or lack thereof. So probably, I told you we were going to go through the Old Testament, and we could literally just go page by page through every place where we've been given commands, but I'm trying to pick out kind of highlighted areas that are particularly known or focused on for specific commands. So we're going to start off here in this next section with Exodus 20 and the Ten Commandments. So we're just going to look at the first commandment today, and it says in verse 3, it says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." And one of the things that we see here is that this is not a case of God being wanting to just garner all of our attention, wanting to be this attention hog and this megalomaniac and things like this. This is a matter of God telling us that we are to have no other gods before Him, because God has understanding that we don't have. And we see this later on in the Bible where we see that there is only one God, that there is no other God. Sometimes we do see where mankind refers to fallen angels or demons, as gods with a little g. We see that with Baal and things like this. We see different things like this where mankind picks out other things that they want to worship. We also see this kind of in the sense of idols, where idols are sometimes created, and that is really just a picture of us creating something that takes precedence over God. Or in the case of us deifying an idol, it's a case of us lifting something up that is going to, or creating a God rather after our own heart. And in both cases, this is a case where we have a tendency to seek out deities that affirm what we want and our own desires and things like this. And particularly because God has that supernatural knowledge of good and evil, we have a tendency to follow our own fleshly desires, where God has the ability to discern between, look, this is of your flesh and this is of the Spirit. And we see this later on in some New Testament passages, particularly in Hebrews. But as we're going through and as we're doing these things, we have a tendency to kind of take on this attitude that we know best. And that's ultimately what a lot of this disobedience comes down to, is it comes down to a case of God telling us, don't worship other gods, and we're like, no, I'm going to worship another God. I'm not ready to give up on a God, but I'm going to seek after a God that tells me what it is that I want to hear. And this is where this particular command lies. We see this a lot also when we seek counsel from individuals where we're looking for friends or associates or whatever to kind of unload some of our problems on, but we have a tendency to always seek after those people who we intuitively know, even if it's just on a subconscious level, are going to tell us what we want to hear. It's only through the Spirit of God that we seek out true discerning counsel who will hold us accountable and hold us to a biblical standard regardless, because two Christians can do that to one another because they both have the same heart. They both have that same spirit and that same motivation. So sometimes, and I've seen this before in the past, where individuals will, professing Christians may be involved in an adulterous relationship, and instead of going to their church and and saying, look, I'm having these temptations, I'm being drawn into this relationship, I know, I want to get some counsel. Is God leading me away from my marriage and into this adulterous relationship? Which, any Christian with any amount of time in the Bible knows that this is not something that God does. However, I've literally seen cases where this has happened, and that individual, despite the time that they had in the Bible, in the church, in things like that, knowing that what they were doing was wrong, they still sought worldly counsel because, in opposition to Christian counsel, because they knew that the Christian counsel was going to tell them the truth, whereas worldly counsel will tell them, "Well, follow your heart and do this and do that," and they would justify, they would provide a basis for justification for their actions. And we have to be really careful about doing this. This is one of the reasons why the Bible strongly encourages us to seek godly counsel, as we've seen in the Proverbs. Because we need brothers and sisters who will hold us accountable, because we all want the same goal. True Christians really all want the same goal, and that is to be with Christ. It's not about living to some cultural standard or anything like that. It's about being conformed to Christ's image. It's about being closer to Christ. It's about one day being with Him. We all have that same motivation in mind if Christ is truly our Lord. And I want a brother to tell me, "Hey, dude, you're getting off track. You're focusing on this. You're getting off the path." I want somebody to snatch me back from the fire, as we see in some of Paul's epistles. And to set me back on that path, as we see in Pilgrim's Progress. So by the same token, when we're seeking counsel from God, it's the same thing. And when we look at this first commandment, "Have no other gods before me," it's because God knows there are no other gods that have any power that we can put any faith or trust in. And the gods that are out there, gods with a little g, these demonic fallen, angels, things like this, they don't have our best interests in heart. So in either case, whether it be a complete false idol that we have just created in our own imagination, or whether it be a god with a little g, like a fallen angel or something like that we're worshiping, in either case, the best case scenario is that it does nothing. The worst case scenario is that it's something that is specifically focused on leading us away from God. So in both cases, God telling us to not worship other gods is God still looking out for our best interest. And the question is when we hear that command from God to not pursue these things, do we trust that He has our best interest? Or do we just default to some sort of justification, seeking counsel from wherever it is, or whomever will tell us what it is that we want to hear, or will affirm the desires that are within our own heart? Whether it be to justify murdering or raping or pillaging or slavery, or whatever it is that we're seeking in a particular religion or deity or spiritual encounter or whatever, are we genuinely seeking the truth? Are we genuinely believing that God has our best interest in mind, and that all of these other false idols or false pictures or false gods do not? So even in this first command of the Ten Commandments, it still comes down to an issue of faith. Do we trust God has our best interest, or don't we? Do we trust that God's character is good, or don't we? It's still an issue of faith. Obedience is still an issue of faith. So we're going to keep going through here and looking at these. So, all right, God bless.